Welcome, welcome. Today my guest is Ben Macpherson, and I'm not going to spend long before I bring you on screen because everybody who's here, I hope, is here to see the guest. So Ben is up at the Edinburgh Fringe. He's doing the show Serious Nonsense for grown-up children. And I have a list of things that I know he's brilliant at, and I know he'll be really embarrassed that have been listed, but I'm going to list them anyway. He's an improv wrangler, actor, writer, storyteller, poet, comedian, author, producer, facilitator, and working in theatre and education with children, and a published author. So before he can take the blush from his cheeks, I'm going to bring him on screen. Hi, Ben.
Hello. Hi there. How are we doing?
I'm doing well. It's always lovely to have friends on the show, to be able to just find out for the record just how awesome you've been.
That's very
Ben,
generous.
Just tell
Thank you so
everybody
much.
a little bit about who you are and where you've ended up today.
Okay, it was May 27th, 1993, and I was born. Then not much interesting happens for about 20-ish years. But cut to who I am now, sort of 10 years further down that process. I am like you say, a writer, performer, poet, theatre maker, producer, director, improviser, 100 different jobs in the arts that you sort of have to do to hustle and make it and stay here. And right now I'm up at the Edinburgh Fringe, like you said, with my family-friendly poetry show, Serious Nonsense for Terribly Grown-Up People.
Selling merch as well, selling the book. I mean, that's the thing. So it's come that full journey. So I think when I started to think about this year and what it might be, I didn't think the Edinburgh Fringe was going to be part of my journey.
Mm-hmm.
And it really started with me trying to make sense of the new equity branch structure regime, which kind of came into the new year. And I needed to see the East Midlands. And part of the first thing of the East Midlands that really came onto my radar, because I think we'd met at a Chronic Insanity pop-up in the Surface Gallery. And I mentioned that we had this new branch that was happening, and you went, "Oh, I'm an equity member." And you told me about January the 31st, you were going to do a theatre network makers. So how did that come about? And what has your journey been since for that year? I'm really wanting to understand how you've come through the year.
So in January, we had the Nottingham Theatre Makers Meetup, which was an event at the beautiful Malt Cross in the heart of Nottingham, which is a old music hall that's been turned into a sort of pub and event space, currently managed by the YMCA, and it is absolutely stunning. They've got gorgeous Victorian wrought iron like pillars and railings and sort of sculpted flowers and things. It's absolutely stunning. And this huge vaulted glass sort of prism over the top of the building. And I organised an event at this space called the Nottingham Theatre Makers Meetup. The idea being that I kept meeting people in Nottingham who were like, "Oh yeah, I also work in theatre," and I was like, "What? No way!" And I was like, "Well, I need to meet more of these people." Because I love engaging with creative communities. I think the more communication within a creative community there is, the more opportunities for work, for supporting each other, for strengthening what the Midlands offering exists. And so I sort of said, right, well, no one else seems to be organising this kind of thing. I'll do it. So we brought together some of the largest arts organisations in the city. So we had places like the Nottingham Playhouse, None Such Studios, some sort of mid-level companies like Chronic Insanity, like New Perspectives. And then we also had folks from Equity there as well to sort of try to connect with people. And I tried to get people from Beck to across, but I never got a reply to those emails. They're probably busy answering everyone else's emails, as I understand it. Anyone in Beck2 has got about 8 email addresses and has to sort of answer all of them on a daily basis. So I understand why I fell through the cracks there. But it's a place for artists and theatre makers to exist and build connections so that the creative community doesn't feel quite as isolating as it can do.
And really pioneering as well to be bringing, I think, those particular sectors together all at the same time. And it's certainly the questions that members of Equity who are starting to be aware of the East Midlands branch are starting to ask exactly those questions. We're starting to look at mapping the Midlands, the East Midlands especially, to say, well, who is here? Where are we? How can we all support each other? And that theatre makers network. So you see yourself as a theatre maker. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's sort of, I use theatre maker because I can't find, it's simpler than doing the 10 jobs that's there. I think I see myself fundamentally as an entertainer, whether that is in a performance capacity, in a production capacity. That is the nature of the beast. You have to wear many hats. And sort of the journey into that was sort of via comedy originally. So I suppose technically I'm also a comedian and a sketch writer and a playwright. And so getting this space to discover your identity and actually attach yourselves to different communities, to try on different things and different roles in a space where you can bring the skills you already have that are good and not worry about your membership, your validity within a space is really crucial. And I think that's something that when we look at an area like the East Midlands, we have such an important job as people who take one step further forward in organizing or sort of putting ourselves out there, that actually, as well as creating our own work and creating it to the highest standards we can, we also have to be the standard bearer. We have to be waving the flag to sort of go, actually, theatre and live performance doesn't just exist in London and Manchester and Bristol and Brighton. There is this amazing heartland of the country that sort of just gets kind of, it's like a cough in the middle of a sentence. You sort of go, oh yes, here's the south and the north, and you've got this
There's the
amazingly
Midlands.
talented area. To write off a place like Birmingham because it is not in the proven track record of the south, or the emerging sort of fundable areas of the north. It feels quite flippant in a way. And Birmingham gets so much attention because it is a larger city. Now,
and it's huge. You don't quite realise how huge Birmingham really is. And then you've got Derby, Leicester, Nottingham, Northampton, out to Lincoln, Newark. South of anything south of Sheffield is kind of the Midlands. It's a massive area. So and the East Midlands being where we reside.
And I think especially if you sort of take Nottingham, if you take Nottingham as the centre of the East Midlands, which I do, living there, it's half an hour to Derby, it's half an hour to Leicester, it's 45 minutes to Sheffield, 45 to an hour to Northampton, 45 to an hour to Lincoln. There is a network which, with the right infrastructure, the right support, the right options to talk, there's this amazing potential for this to be a sort of very collegiate creative space. Whereas you have got in larger cities where you've got organizations with perhaps stronger lines of funding, stronger routes to getting new work created, new opportunities being discovered. With our slightly smaller but no less vital and vibrant cities, by having this sort of network and allowing a dialogue to happen, I think there's so much potential for amazing work that doesn't just speak to the vision of a director or the flavour of a writer, but actually this is something that you've got a wide area with a lot of stakes taking part in, that doesn't exist in that many other cities. I mean, if you look at the theatre commissioning and development work of new work in London, you'll have freelancers who sort of bounce between 2 or 3 theatres, but they're all just sort of subdivisions of London. I've spoken to people who are like, oh yes, no, I never talk to theatres south of the river. And it's like, what?
That's a very London thing.
What on earth are you talking about? Get over yourself. Good grief. Whilst I've been up at the Fringe, I was speaking to this very interesting producer who I will not name, but he was having quite a lot of sort of early success. A young man in his, I would say, he was under 25, over 20, and he was attached as a producer to several sort of West End shows, and he only thought at that kind of scale. And it's like, oh, well, if it's not West End, then I'm not going to bother with it. It's like, that is an atrocious attitude to have. Good grief. And then you have that terrible... I think
there's a necessity, and sadly, I think depending on where you come from and how driven you are to be a creative artist, or whether you're a professional, successful entertainment industry person, there is the financial consideration. And I think that's the thing. Being a maker and being an independent freelancer, there is a certain amount of ground up work that you do, whereas a lot of producers that go only West End, they're kind of coming top down. And the people that they meet up in the middle, and it's where they cross over. And I think with performers and creatives like yourself, who are resident here in the East Midlands, you are predominantly identifying yourself as a theatre maker, but are looking to be engaged in different projects, and you're understanding the landscape that might give that to you. So you recently became an associate artist with New Perspectives. How did that come about?
Half a year ago now. That's terrible. Gosh, where's that time gone? So for those who don't know, New Perspectives is an amazing theatre company that is all about sharing sort of fresh, vibrant new work. It deals with a lot of first-time theatre makers. They've got amazing projects that sort of anyone can go in and pitch. Hey, here is an idea. I've never done any sort of work with theatre before. And they've just finished a fantastic show about a road worker who also started doing drag, and it's amazing. And so their sort of speciality is creating these spaces where literally new perspectives, new voices can come forward. As part of that, they have a new associate scheme, which is taking a sort of, I was about to say the word cadre. That feels wrong. That feels oddly militaristic. A new intake, a new collective of artists to help them develop their work. So I approached them when they did their call out and sort of said, this is me, this is what I've done, these are the areas I want to develop in. And I was fortunate to be one of the ones who was selected. And fingers crossed, that continues to be an amazing experience, an amazing partnership. I'm so excited.
And how do you, I mean, we have to talk about our incomes, and as freelancers, how we manage to feed, clothe ourselves and pay our rent in this climate as well. How do you balance portfolio pieces, which are really vital to give you profile, that may have a small fund attached, against being able to actually pay your bills as they're rising? I think it's an important conversation for us always to continue to have at this level of theatre makers who, if we're lucky, we may be employed for a little while. If we're lucky, we may join a project that will have a fund that will keep you for 3 or 4 weeks. But other than that, you're out back on the fringes of trying to feed yourself. So where's the balance there for you?
So my work with this is my versatility pays my way more than anything. I spend a lot of my time and a lot of my income coming from bringing my poetry work into schools, working with young people through organisations like Nottingham UNESCO City of Literature and the Writing East Midlands team, and bringing workshops, hosting events, sharing, teaching, encouraging arts in young people. As fortunately, whilst budgets everywhere do get hacked and juggled around, it does seem that there is a it's not a triple lock, but it might be a single lock around arts for the young people, children, youth arts.
Yeah. It's part of the dialogue, isn't it, of knowing, having to be a good networker. I think that's an important thing as a maker, that, and you say that versatility of finding out where people are, and the Theatre Makers Network really enabled people who might not be quite as good at getting on that first rung of the networking to be able to find the people that you've brought together. I think that's the great thing about your capacity to bring people together and working in schools. So the Edinburgh Fringe journey. Tell me about your Edinburgh Fringe journey, because you were at Fringe last year, and I know we'd spoken, and you had a venue that wasn't, it really demonstrated what Fringe is. You are on the fringes of the mainstream, and a lot of what goes on at the Fringe, they're venues that, if you're basically the Fringe to the big 5 or 6 venues. So tell me about your Edinburgh experience.
Organisations like PBH.
Have you done Edinburgh before COVID?
Yes.
So just take us on your little Fringe journey.
So I've been coming up to the Fringe since 2012. For the first 5 years of turning up. So 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, I was up as a punter, just seeing, enjoying, learning, doing a couple of guest spots here and there. And then in 2017, I brought my first solo show up, The Fall of Byron Montrose, poet, gentleman, lover, which was a pun-filled romp across Napoleonic Europe, full of sort of eye-rolling, groan-worthy puns, terrible poetry about sort of failed Byronesque Lothario, sort of sleeping his way around Europe until he finally learned what the heck was wrong with him. So that was 2017, and I had a really good time and a very successful first Fringe up with PBH, and I brought it back a second year, and I had a good time, but there was some issues with venues, so I was sort of juggled around a little bit, which is fine. You know, that's part of what happens, and we learn, we deal, and we grow. Then in 2018, 2017, 2018, I brought those shots. In 2019, I decided to I'm going to have a bit of a fallow year, not going to do the Fringe this year. And at this time, I was still working full-time for a bank. So I only ever had 2 weeks leave I could actually get off to come up to the Fringe. And after those 2 weeks were sort of had been spent at the Fringe the last few years, I thought, right, we can have a family holiday. And we had a big trip with my parents. And that was amazing. That was excellent. But that August, I had such terrible FOMO. Like, I should be there. Why am I not there? I'm failing as an artist for not being at the Fringe. Which, incidentally, I was wrong to feel that way. Absolutely wrong. There's a thought that, the creative world moves to Edinburgh for a month, and you just have to look at how Camden Fringe has developed and grown during this period.
Yeah, there are other Fringes.
Exactly. I had an amazing trip to Brighton this year for Brighton Fringe, and there are these excellent Fringes that exist in spaces, and attaching all this worth to Edinburgh was really harmful, I think, to sort of the well-being and the psyche. It is an amazing festival, and it provides no opportunity quite like Edinburgh, but it does not have to be the only place that you are going to see, develop, and learn new art. So then 2 years of pandemic, 2020, 2021, didn't go up to the Fringe. And last year, I brought up my latest solo show, Bonfire Man, which is a one-man mockumentary exploring a festival in the middle of August in Arizona that bears a lot of similarities to a certain flaming effigy of a representation of a human. And I won't say the specific words because they have threatened legal action against me when I used their name, so I had to change the title of the show. And I never heard from them again. But I brought that up, and in 2022, I was at a new pop-up venue over at the Omni Centre, which is one of the big arts cinema complexes, which is about 5 minutes on the way walk down to Leith. And they had turned 2 restaurant units into 5 stages, and these stages were built with plywood, scaffolding, and not much else. There were no roofs, there was no sound dampening, big echoey rooms, and it truly was a sort of fringe space in the worst interpretation of that possible. And I think the real reason with that was because the people who had agreed to host the spaces had tried to do it as cheaply as possible. And I understand, we all want to do things as cheaply as possible.
And they're always looking for spaces. And so that was last year. So you decided to go back. And what happened in this year's Fringe?
So this year I had my book come out, Serious Nonsense for Terribly Grown-Up People. And I thought, right, this year I'm going to jump genres. I'm not going to do a specifically comedy show this year, in spite of the fact they're funny poems. I'm not looking to be programmed as comedy. I'm looking to be programmed as spoken word. And through getting that programming and through getting that space, I was able to apply to the Keep It Fringe Fund when that was announced. Which was, for those of you who don't know, there was £100,000 donated from the Fleabag Fund to help fund fringe artists. And I was lucky enough to receive one of those bursaries. So I got £2,000 to help bring my show up to the Fringe. And I knew I wanted to be PBH again with the show. And I knew I was going to have a different approach to it this year. This year wasn't about trying to get big reviews. It was about trying to learn how these poems worked performed. And so I ended up with a venue that was called, oh, come on, brain, good grief.
Rito and Shake.
Well, no.
That
was not where I was booked originally. I was booked at a venue out on further along Southbridge, which is by day a cafe and laundrette. And I was like, okay, well that's fine. And I got the news that I was going to be there, and I was like, oh, it's a little bit of a walk, but it's a good time of day. We can deal with that. That's fine. Cut to, it is the end of April, start of May, and I'm on a trip to Rome with my parents and my sister, and we suddenly, I get off the plane to an email that says, please contact me urgently. Your venue has decided they do not want to be a free fringe venue this year. We need to get you reprogrammed, especially in light of the fact that you've won a bursary. So, crap. Calling frantically the amazing PBH team, and I got to speak to Luke Meredith, the head honcho, sort of from an airport in Italy. So if you order a cannoli and sit in the little cafe bar in the corner of Rome Airport, you too can sit in the sight of my panic as we sort of worked out where I could go. And I ended up at Burrito and Shake, which is a restaurant that's had a load of connections to the PBH True Fringe. And pretty much every summer for, I think, 4 or 5 years, they've given us their basement to host shows in. And it's brilliant. It's 3 minutes off the mile, just off Northbridge, really easy, really accessible, loads of passing traffic. So I ended up with an earlier morning slot there, and I've got to do my show there every day since the 5th of August.
Wow. So how many days have you got left?
2 left.
Two left. So
it's been an absolute blast.
So what happens next? What's going to take you through to the end of the year? And then have you got any visions for what 2024 might look like?
Well, yes, I do. The end of my year, fortunately, a couple of weeks before the end, before I came up to Edinburgh, I got news that I'd been awarded one of the DYCP grants from the Arts Council. Thank you very much.
Hurrah!
And for those of you who don't know, DYCP is a project run by the Arts Council. It's called Developing Your Creative Practice. And it's a brilliant fund whereby you think about, okay, well, who am I as an artist? What have I done so far? What's sort of in my head at the moment, and what do I want to do next?
Yeah.
And so I sort of thought, well, I'm a theatre maker and I'm a poet and comedian and this and that. And it's like, well, theatre maker and poet are the two areas I'm sort of most excited about and finding the most work through. And I have this book of children's poetry, and I've never made children's theatre before. How could I tie these things together?
Mhm.
And the interesting is that there isn't really spoken word for young people out there. You have a lot of sort of 16 plus, 18 plus poetry and spoken word shows. But by that age, poetry isn't cool anymore. So what I wanted to do was create a show aimed at sort of 8 to 12 that gives poetry in a space that is playful and storytelling and sort of tells story in an engaging way, but is aimed at a slightly older audience. So I wanted to make this space that was specifically, not a musical, not one poem being told over 45 minutes. It's a poetry show with a load of poems, but they have a theatrical framing device.
Mhm.
So my project, or my DYCP focus, is going to be about learning to bring together my theatre making and my poetry, and sort of aiming that specifically at younger audience.
Fantastic. If it wasn't for DYCP, my year of balance and being able to do this Edinburgh Fringe in an environment that I've had the last year to ask exactly those questions about my practice, about immersive theatre, about Fringe, about independent work, finding theatre makers, exploring AI and crypto. The Arts Council gave me a phenomenal opportunity to do that. Well, as we bring this to a close, Ben, I didn't ask you before we started because I kind of forgotten, but if I was to ask you to recite just a short piece to lead us out, would you be able to do that?
Certainly.
And if you are, I will put you on full screen. Just tell us where we can find you on the interwebs.
So I can be found online through Facebook /Ben Comedy, through Twitter at Ben Macpherson1, and on Instagram at Ben.Macpherson1. BenMacPherson.co.uk is going to be the easiest way to find me. That's my website.
And it will go in the show notes. And I am going to give you the screen. I'm going to give you the stage to take us out. Thank you so much, Ben, for being a guest.
My pleasure. The Battenberg Fairy. Somewhere in your home, in an overlooked cupboard, hides a wee little beastie you've not yet discovered. In a den in the corner of the uppermost shelf, the Battenberg Fairy lives all by herself. Now the Battenberg Fairy stands 6 fingers high, and out of her back she has wings like a fly. She's got short, spiky hair, bright eyes as you'd think, and her clothes are alternately yellow, then pink. But she's not some fairy who dances round flowers. Her nose is all crooked, her face always glowers, her pale lips are thin, and just underneath a fine little row of sharp pointed teeth. At night, when all of the house is asleep, she wakes and gets to her beetle-like feet. Out of her cupboard she jumps as she titters, and over the counters she cackles and skitters. She goes to the fridge, opens the door, and leaps to the 3rd shelf, straight from the floor. She dances on food, right there in the cold, and where her foot touches, starts to grow mold. Green little spots, white bits all hairy. That is the spell of the Battenberg Fairy. She plays with the milk, which curdles all lumpy. The skins of the peppers wilt and go bumpy, and a trout on a plate in the exact spot that she places her foot. That fish starts to rot. From out of the fridge to the table jumps down. She lands on bananas that start to turn brown. Suddenly, madness begins to consume her. She dances fandango atop a satsuma. Her tangerine dance floor starts to turn blue as the fruit in the fruit bowl starts to rot too. She plays with the flies, but she won't know she's done till her dance is disturbed by that first light of sun. For at dawn's early light she beats a retreat with fast flapping wings and small jumping feet. Straight back to her shelf to go rest her eyes, she curls up to sleep in a magic disguise. And if you went looking, I'd forgive your mistake, as all you would find was a Battenberg cake. Thank you very much.